Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Thursday Checkdown. Our show is all about providing you with insights on fantasy football while also having fun discussing the game with many amazing people in our community. Tonight, we get defensive as we bring in one of the top IDP analysts, Mike Woellert of the IDP show. Hey, Mike.
Hey, fellas, what's
Mike
going on?
Hey, good. Mike is a featured writer and ranker covering IDP. And Mike, it's great to have you on the show. How are you doing this evening?
Oh, not too bad. Appreciate you reaching out and invite me on. So far, so good. We got game one of the NBA Finals. I got Guardians and Yankees on, so it's a good Thursday night.
Nice.
That's
Appreciate you
great.
coming on, Mike, because for one, I've never played IDP before. These guys convinced me to hop in this year. So I'm looking forward to absorb as much of this show as I possibly can. And I apologize now if I give you some second grade IDP questions.
Oh, no. I always run under the assumption that there's always somebody new listening, so I try not to throw out too many terms that are going to go over everybody's head. So I always try to operate, hey, everybody, kind of in that 101 type mode. So all good.
Awesome. And we appreciate that. And we're going to get deep into the IDP world in a little bit, but I think it'd be great just to get to know you a little bit better. And so, why don't you give us your background, like where you live, your family, and
Sure.
what you do outside of fantasy football?
Well, born and raised in Cleveland, so a lifelong diehard Cleveland sports fan. So,
Nice.
been married 23 years. Two boys, one in college, one a junior, and we're just we're kind of homebodies. We travel when we can, go on, take our weekly vacation where we can. Got parents down in Charleston, so we try to take advantage of the free yearly vacation down in Charleston every year. But other than that, in terms of things just outside, it's just mostly, we're kind of homebodies. So, kind of spend a little time outside and not like hiking, but just like sitting outside and just not doing a whole lot of anything.
Nice. So I just want to mention that I was I guess I will say Guardians, but but I've been a fan of that baseball team for a while, since the '95 team. Basically, I was sad that they lost that year, just as sad as you were.
Of course, yeah. Of course,
Yeah.
that year we had to run into Tom Glavine, John Smoltz, and
Yeah,
Greg
right.
Maddux, and we were the only team that was the out of all of the years that they've been to the World Series. Of course, it's Cleveland that they beat. When Cleveland had the absolute best team in baseball, we couldn't hit anything.
That was a great ball club, so regardless. All right, so where are we gonna go? What's next? When did you start playing fantasy football, and how long you been playing? You tell us about your first league.
So my first league wasn't even mine. I started in 2005. I drafted for my uncle who was going on vacation the next day with his family. And so, it was an in-person draft. So there was no really, the online thing hadn't really boomed yet. So the in-person drafts were still the thing. So basically my uncle said, hey, here's a magazine. I've got the first pick. Take Ricky Williams. Or no, we had the second pick. I'm sorry, we had the second pick. So he's like, hey, either take Ricky Williams or LaDainian Tomlinson, whoever falls to at number two. Take one of those two, and then it's basically just kind of follow this map. And I honestly had really no idea what I was doing, so I'm just kind of drafting, and I would give him a call on the road. I'm like, hey, dude, what do I do? So I had a lot of fun doing it, but I think it was one of his worst years ever in that league. So I was not welcomed back to draft with him ever again. So I'm like, hey, not my fault. What do you're the one who put me in
You're
this
lost.
position. What do I don't know. What are you talking about? So, and then 2006 was really the first year that I actually did a draft on my own. I was in a league with one of my wife's friends at the time. And that was like just an online Yahoo draft. And I don't really remember. I think that was the year I might have drafted Carson Palmer when he went off with the Bengals in that first year, in that big year he went off against for the Bengals. And then I guess I could, but I'd probably say mostly, 2005 was like kind of my first taste. And I think actually that was the year Michael Vick got hurt in the preseason and was out for the year. So I think that it was a draft where it was like week 1 of the preseason. I don't think I drafted Michael Vick. So at least I didn't have Michael Vick. So I did avoid that landmine. But that was the year that I think he like tore his knee or he did something and he was out for the year. So avoided that mess. But 2006 was kind of the first year that I kind of drafted was doing my own thing.
Okay. And how many leagues are you currently in? Managed leagues or best ball? And what are your favorite types of leagues to be in? And I'm hoping you're saying
I mostly do redraft. I'm not in very many. I don't do very many dynasty leagues. It is mostly redraft. Every year I always try to cut down, but then every year I'm always doing the same leagues over and over again because they're just fun. So I'd say I'm probably in probably 10 total, a combination of redraft and some best balls. I've been trying to do more best balls on Sleeper, and now you have this fast draft. So I don't know if you've heard of fast draft. It's basically 10 teams, six rounds, and you're done drafting literally in like 5 minutes.
It's 6 flex spots, right?
Yeah, it's basically a draft whoever you want. I've been doing the defensive ones where basically you draft your 6 IDPs and you have these boosters, and so I've been doing a lot of those. So shout out. You want to do a IDP show deposit, $50 match, IDP show deposit match. So use that as your promo code. Shameless plug. Anyway, but the best balls are a lot of fun because you don't really have to think about them. You just kind of check in your score and see how your team did. But probably around 10 total, and I somehow get suckered into doing another here and there. But probably I think 1 year I got up to 15 or 16, and I'm just like, I can't do that again. It's like the waiver wire ends up being like you're a second part-time job that you're not getting paid for, and you're getting frustrated because you got to get up it's like a Tuesday night. It's like, wait, I got to do waivers again? What? Why do we do them on Tuesdays? What? So I try to, like I said, so I try to cut back, but probably like I said, probably around 10.
Nice.
All right, so tell us about your journey as a fantasy football content creator, including what you got going on currently.
So I got into IDP. So one, I think in terms of IDP, I've been playing IDP since 2007. I was part of a fantasy site called the Fantasy Asylum, and the URL was literally fantasyfootball.com. And I really hope they made a killing on that URL, whoever sold it. It was literally fantasyfootball.com. So it was message board. So it was basically before Twitter. You'd post something on a message board. And that's basically how you'd interact. And a couple of dudes on the message board invited me to this league. It was called Shock and Awe, and it was a keeper league with IDP. And I'm like, hey, why the hell not? So tried it. I think my first pick was Paul Posluszny, and then it went all downhill from there. My team was horrible, but I learned from it, and I had a lot of fun doing it. So I have been playing, like I said, I've been playing in IDP leagues ever since. And actually, I just decided right around that time, around 2007, 2008, for the same site. Like, hey, I think I kind of want to write about this. I really liked IDP. I did my next couple of drafts in 2008. I'm like, all right, it's still an underserved market, but it was really underserved back in, it was really underserved back in those, mid late 2000s. So I reached out to the owner and I'm like, hey, I'm doing a lot more as far as participating on these message boards, answering more questions. How about, you kind of let me do some live chat or maybe even doing some writing? It doesn't look like IDP is served very well on the site. So I'm happy to do kind of an IDP article, whether it's like a waiver wire article or something, I'm happy to do it. So, dude kind of gave me a chance, said, yeah, go ahead. We'll have you do kind of a waiver wire article or whatever you feel comfortable with. And we'll have you do some live chat. And then that's kind of how it started, and probably been writing IDP content, focusing primarily on IDP content. Cause I figured that's where I could really, you make you focus on one thing, cause everybody can write about a waiver wire articles on running backs and all the offensive positions. That was, even at that point, everybody was doing that. So I'm like, nobody's writing about ITP. So that's what I am 100% going to focus on. Nothing else. I'll just look at rankings. I'll look at others. I'll look at the other experts for positions and things like that. But I was going to solely focus on IDP. So I made that choice a long time ago. It's a lot more fun, I think, honestly. A lot more fun to write about. And then I've just written for some various sites. Like I said, started with, fantasyfootball.com. Wrote a few seasons for Pro Football Focus Fantasy. Then went to 4for4 for probably quite a bit. I want to say 7-8 seasons. And then went to the IDP show in 2024. But like I said, just been solely focusing on IDP.
And kudos, because you were right. Even still today, IDP is still underserved. In fact, I've got a greenfield idea for you later on in the show where it's like, I could sure use it right now. Scott Fishbowl is really buzzing right now. Of course, they announced scoring yesterday. Yep. And one of the things they announced was scoring that involves IDP. But why don't you tell us a little bit about your involvement or participation in Scott Fishbowl, and then I'll ask you a question about the IDP part of it.
Sure. I actually learned about this. I actually learned about the Scott Fishbowl probably, I want to say 2016, 2017. Scott just DM'd me out of the blue, said, hey, do you want to join this tournament? It's for charity. It's this, and this. And I said, yeah, why not? And I've probably been in it since, I want to say 2016. I think when they did I think it was when it was actors, or when it was like the SFB 480. Mm-hmm. So I think it was actors, and I've been doing it ever since. It's just, it's definitely an interesting tournament. You throw basically everything that you know about fantasy football. You just throw it out the window. What you know doesn't even matter. Correct. Even what you know for super flex leagues and what you do, it just doesn't matter. So I've had various degrees of success, but not really very successful. So, I guess the 1 year, my best year actually was the year Andrew Luck retired. I had out of the blue retired. I drafted Andrew Luck. He was my QB1. Most people did. But I somehow but Lamar Jackson carried my team that nice.
Year.
Yeah. And I think I don't know how far I got. I know I got into some deep playoff run, but basically Lamar Jackson was a complete and total cheat code. If you had Lamar Jackson,
that was one of the best fantasy football seasons ever.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So I remember waking up to the news that Andrew Luck retired. I'm like, and I think I added Gardner Minshew. I think I missed out on Jacoby Brissett, and I think Gardner Minshew actually had a pretty decent year that year. Yeah. But it's a fun tournament, obviously, and it goes to a good cause. So it's like, you see people complain, I didn't get invited, and blah blah. I'm like, dude, it's just a free tournament. It goes to charity, and if you don't, if
you don't get invited, donate, and maybe next year you'll get invited.
Right. So I'm pretty sure he allows everybody in now. It just seems like everybody can get in now.
5,000, especially if you wanted to go into a live draft. Yeah, you virtually could just get in. But you have to go through the steps still. You have to
got to sign up. And I think they look for people who are very involved. So
participate in some of the games and participate in some of the, Twitter groups. And there's the Hopefuls Twitter group that, I think each year helps, shine lights on people so that, they can get in. One of the things that's different this year is, and they just announced the scoring last night, and there's an IDP component to it. So wanted to get your thoughts on that and, what sort of an impact that's going to have on drafting and, roster management. So why don't you tell us a little bit?
Well, I did get a little excited until I saw I saw that there was IDP scoring, and I'm like, oh,
yeah.
And then I saw one of the replies that, oh, there's no positions. I'm like, oh, okay.
There's no defensive position.
There's no defensive position. So basically, they made the scoring for Travis Hunter.
There you go, the Hunter clause.
So
and maybe DK Metcalf after all the Pittsburgh interceptions.
Right. Yeah. So he might get a handful of tackles. So so in terms of my approach, I've approached Travis Hunter as a wide receiver, that he's probably going to be wide receiver first. Yeah. When doing my projections for IDP show, I have Hunter projected for about 315 or so defensive snaps total for the season. So I figured he's probably going to get anywhere between maybe 15 to 17 per game. So I think I have him maybe projected for maybe an interception or two. So I think his defensive, I think in my opinion, his defensive impact is not going to be great.
Yeah.
He's probably going to have 750 to 800 yards. He's probably going to be a decent, maybe wide receiver 4. But it will be very interesting to see, because there's no way I'm taking, I've already saw one site project him to be the second highest scorer.
Yeah.
And that's insane.
Right.
But I think he's probably going to, I wouldn't be surprised if people are just going to take him in probably within the first 3 rounds. And I'm probably not going to touch him within the first 3 rounds unless he has a good camp, and, and it is, again, it's all fun. So, I mean, obviously it's a get your guy type of thing. So, if that's who people want, I'm not going to go away with that, but I don't think his defensive impact is going to be all that significant, to be honest.
And do you kind of agree that even if they do, they're going to ease them into the defensive side so that,
I think so. I mean, they still spend a second round pick on him, or a second overall pick. So you don't want to put him, as much as he wants to say, yes, I can play both positions, I'm built to play both positions. The NFL is a game with grown ass men. So, he's still not I'm not going to say he's like slight, but I mean, he's not a huge person by any stretch.
Sure.
So you still want to protect your guys. So like I said, I think like 15 snaps on the defensive side of the ball, and he's getting some defensive snaps in OTAs. I think he's going to be primarily a wide receiver, I think.
Got it.
Okay. I agree with this, and maybe like you'll see him in the important downs and important scenarios and like end of the fourth quarter, stuff like that.
Yep. If you need to get a stop. Yeah. If you maybe need to get a big defensive stop or something like that, but he's going to, I honestly think he can play both positions very well. I mean, when I looked at him as a cornerback,
right,
once he adapts to the NFL game, he's going to piss off a lot of receivers because he is really sticky. He's really good in coverage. He's a really good cornerback.
But to do both sides all the time is takes its toll for sure.
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
Rick?
And yeah. Well, first of all, the live events. Are you going to go to the Scott Fish Bowl as a live draft, or are you?
No, I usually do it online. Yeah, I'm an online drafter. I don't have time to get out, so it's mostly just I do it online. I've been doing them online.
Yeah, and the other live event, the big one, is the FF EXPO in Canton. Are you planning on being out there?
Yeah, I've been out there the last couple of years. I've been doing the Kings Classic draft. I don't think I'm going to be doing the Kings Classic draft this year, but I'm hopeful to do the another IDP. Like I was in the IDP roundtables Just one of the sessions. So I'm hoping to do that again this year. So I'll probably hopefully make my way back down there. Yeah.
Nice.
How far is that from? It's an hour from Cleveland, right? I believe I'm flying.
Yeah, it's about an hour.
We're flying into Cleveland and then renting a car and driving over there. So that's
you're
why
probably better off. I'd fly into Canton Akron Airport if you can.
Yeah, it was like a significant, like a $400 or $500 difference.
It's a lot less expensive flying into Cleveland
because of that. Because of
Really?
the Hall of Fame. Yeah, because of the Hall of Fame, and I think the stuff that's going on at the Hall of Fame that week.
Oh, I figured it would have been cheaper to go into Canton to the Akron.
No.
That's why flights going into Cleveland too. So.
If that gap, if it wasn't if it was like $100, $200 difference,
right.
I'd probably go. But it was like a $480 difference. But,
okay.
So we know you're from Cleveland, so Cleveland Browns.
Yep.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about the 2025 Browns? Give us an outlook.
Oh boy. So
I remember when we asked Wyatt this question. Yeah.
So last year they had one of the top rosters on paper, and they finished 3-14. This year, PFF has ranked them 32nd as far as rosters. So I'm thinking division. They're going to win the division. I mean, if we were a top 5, top 10 roster last year, picked to contend, and we went 3-14, I'm thinking, all right.
Yeah, added
Raiders bottom, but no. Yeah. In all honesty, they're going to win some games they probably shouldn't win. It's a tough schedule. They got a really rough draw. I'm actually going in with really no expectations. The last couple of years I've gone in with high expectations, and especially last year the season was over at the end of September. It was the longest season as a Browns fan I've ever had my entire life. I mean, season was over after week 4. There's just nothing there. So,
well, I love Judkins and Sampson, but I'm kind of curious your thoughts on the quarterback position since I'm a Texan fan, so I'm kind of familiar with one of your quarterbacks, but you drafted 2 and you got a 3rd.
So I mean, I'm still stumped that they traded for Kenny Pickett. I don't know what they saw in him, so I'm still stumped that they traded an asset for him.
Yeah, I think my hands are bigger, so
probably. I wouldn't be
hard to be surprised.
But they really liked Dylan Gabriel. I mean, they, from what I remember in hearing a press conference or talking about the draft, they had Gabriel rated as their quarterback 2. So, and they said if he was 6'2", 6'3", you're talking about a first-round pick. So I'm like, okay, interesting. I don't know. I think Shador was an ownership pick. But,
you could tell by the way the looks though when they announced,
right?
And they're
little overcompensation, maybe.
But even they say, don't look into too much into our looks and what we looked like at the pick. But I'm of the belief just draft or get your quarterback until you find one, and just keep drafting at the position. I was actually angry that Will Howard got taken by Pittsburgh because I was actually kind of hoping Pittsburgh or Cleveland was going to take Howard at some point, because I'm watching Will Howard in the college playoff torch 4 really good teams. And those are some pretty decent defenses. I think Texas, Notre Dame, and Tennessee were pretty good defenses, if I recall correctly. And he slung the ball, made some really good throws. So I'm like, I'm watching this guy win playoff games and totally forget about the Michigan game where he played like crap. Totally compartmentalize that, forget that game, and go out and sling it and throw the ball. So I was like I said, I was a little bit bummed that he went to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, he's got an NFL body and an NFL arm. Yeah, you gotta like, Howard's chances, but then they go out and they get Rodgers.
So,
Who
but
knows what's going on up there either.
But at this point, I'm being a Browns fan and being a Gen Xer. I'm a lethal combination of that. Absolutely nothing phases me anymore. So it's like I think I'm immortal at this point. So it's just like like I said, I'm just going in I'm going in probably with no expectations for the season whatsoever.
Great,
Right.
appreciate that.
I got one Browns question for you.
Yep.
Rick said you mentioned Judkins and Sampson, but is Jerome Ford going disrespected and overlooked right now? Do you think he still has a role on the team?
I mean, I think he will. I think sometimes they'll. I don't know if they're going to. I think they almost have to defer to the rookies because they're a young team. They don't have Nick Chubb anymore, so it's almost like they have to defer to a rookie or someone to play. But I still think Ford is probably going to have some sort of role. But I wouldn't be surprised if Judkins has a good camp or if he has a good preseason, they'll just play him. They'll play him out.
That's what I was thinking. I was like, eventually Judkins probably going to run away with the job. But I'm like, I don't know what to do with Ford because he's kind of cheap. He's going real late in drafts, and just didn't know if he was worth drafting or not.
I think he's probably going to be second in line, but I don't see him getting. I mean, I don't see him getting any more than 100 carries in a season. I think Judkins at some point is just going to pull away with him. I could see him getting the majority of the carries. So I can see mostly maybe Ford and some passing downs, but I think like you said, I think you're basically looking at maybe a change of pace. Give Judkins a breather.
Great. Well, the reason we brought you on and reason we're so excited to have you here is to start talking about IDP. And we'll dive a little bit deeper into IDP, but before we get into some specific players, it would be great to kind of get a grounding with some strategy. And I guess really the first question I always have is, how would you recommend people get into IDP? Would you recommend they jump in, whole hog and do a full IDP league, or do you think that easing in with a couple of IDP positions would get their feet wet and give them some experience of doing it?
Well, the first year I did it, I went head first. I went basically like we basically started 2 defensive line, 3 linebackers, 2 defensive backs. So it was a kind of a general position. I guess it depends on the temperament of your league and what they want to try. So I think I'd like to jump right in and try to draft as many of the positions as you can, because if you just do maybe 3 IDP spots, everybody's going to have a pretty decent roster. So I think there's a little bit less strategy involved in, okay, who do I play, Bobby Wagner or Ernest Jones? It's like, okay, well, who do I drop? Do I drop, this guy for this guy? There's going to be so many options available to you on the wire. You're not going to know what to do. So I always like to go, just go feet first. You don't necessarily have to play like the true position. Like you don't have to go like defensive tackle, defensive end, linebacker, cornerback, safety, but, draft, 2 defensive line, the 3 linebackers and the 2 defensive backs, and kind of see how that goes. So it kind of forces you to think a little bit, and that way you just don't, you're not looking at the waiver wire with all these different really good options to play from, and you're not like racking your brain. Okay, do I start this guy or do I start this elite guy or this elite guy, or whether this elite guy? So it's really kind of forcing you to kind of use some strategy and really and make those decisions.
So is it 7 or 7 players total?
Around 7. Yeah, around 7 players total, and then if you want to add like a couple of flex positions,
they could be any of the 3.
Any of the 3. Maybe you go maybe 7 to 10 starters, and then you got your bench spots. But I always like to just go full board and just jump right in.
Okay.
And there's plenty of people that are writing about IDP that like there's plenty of content for everybody. I mean, it used to be like, yeah, I don't know what to do. I don't know what's out there as far as who I can read, who I can learn, or there's plenty of now. There is a lot more IDP content than there was, back when back in my day, back when I started. So there's a lot of really good content out there.
So if like I'm new, so what do you suggest is the best way to approach it? Should I be looking at like game logs for defensive players? Would that give me the best? I don't know what's the word I'm looking for. The best view of what I should be doing in the draft, like based on consistency, like seeing who's consistent with like
game logs, just game logs. I think the most important thing though that we'll probably touch on, but is obviously going to be snaps. So, but that'll be one of the things that we could touch on. But look at your game logs. Look at past stats. Pro Football Reference has all those stats, and just kind of get an idea of who's logging the tackles, who's logging the stats. That's you can kind of get an idea of who's consistent on a year-to-year basis. Just, you don't need to, the one position though, you don't necessarily need to always like reach on or really do any, reach on is the defensive back position, but linebackers are pretty consistent. Those are kind of, those are your running backs. Those are the guys, those are your workhorses. Those are the guys that are going to be your big producers.
And so you would suggest, looking, if you were having to prioritize your positions, prioritize linebackers and maybe defensive ends, or what do you normally look for first when you're in your draft?
So one of the things that, scoring is going to be key. So you definitely need to look at the scoring setup of your league. So the great thing about IDP is that there's no like standard. So like, there's not like the PPR, there's not like a half PPR, there's not like a point per first down or anything like that. There are some general like baselines. There's, what's considered tackle heavy, where you're getting like 2 points for a solo tackle and 1 point for an assist. Mm-hmm. There's maybe some more balanced leagues where maybe you're only getting 1.5 points for a solo tackle, maybe a half or a 3/4 of a point for an assist, getting a little bit more for sacks, and kind of maybe a little bit more for some of the bigger plays. So that's the great thing. You can really tailor the scoring to how you want to play. So if you really want to bump up the IDP scoring so that it is even or balanced with the offensive positions, you can do that as well. So if you kind of want, if you want to, your IDPs to be on par with your Jamar Chases, with your Lamar Jacksons, with your Saquon Barkley's, scoring it with those equivalents, so that, okay, if I'm at the 103, am I really going to consider taking a linebacker, or really going to consider kind of forces you to think. So that's really the fun part about IDP, is you can really customize and really have fun with the scoring. So with the scoring, if you're making it that, okay, I don't want my linebackers to score as much I want them tailored down, and maybe you're getting more for sacks, and the sacks are weighted a little bit more than maybe for tackles. And then you're also maybe getting some points for quarterback hits or some other points, maybe some tackles for loss. That's maybe where you would consider maybe going with like a defensive end or like an edge rusher, maybe over a linebacker. But in a lot of instances, that's probably the position that I'm probably going with first, is probably the linebacker.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I just want to toss one more question in, Rick, sure, about the draft. At what point do defensive players start going off in the draft? So
if you're doing it for the first time, is it a league that has done IDP in the past, or is this
this is going to be, this is Iggy's F, what's it called? F7. FF7.
Okay. There's already been IDP. So you're entering as a newbie to IDP, but the league has drafted IDPs. What I'd probably do is take a look at the past draft results and kind of get an idea. It could vary. So if you see people are going with IDPs in the 4th round, I'm probably not reaching that high. I'm probably waiting till maybe the 7th or the 8th round. It's not a steadfast rule, but for the most part, I like to try to get my offensive positions built out. I like to have my starting offensive roster kind of built out, maybe a backup or two at a running back before I start kind of tackling the IDPs. So I'm usually looking at the 7th round. So I like to have my quarterback, want to have a couple of running backs, a couple of wide receivers, like I said. Want my starting offensive roster kind of built out and ready to go before I look at an IDP. So of course, it happens every year. Round 5, somebody will take,
I was
a
just
top
gonna
linebacker,
say,
I'm like, and I try not to get flustered. I do get flustered, but it's like I try not to panic when that first IDP does go off the board.
I was just gonna say, if once a few of them go off earlier than what you just talked about, do you have to adjust or?
I don't necessarily, because I've been doing it long enough that I kind of like, okay, I've got the guys that I know I want to target, or it's like, okay, I think this linebacker and this linebacker and this linebacker is probably going to go between the 4th, 5th, and 6th round. I'm probably not going to get Myles Garrett, because Myles Garrett's probably going to go between the 5th and the 6th. So that's why I kind of I try to break things off into tiers. I'm like, okay, all these tiers of edge rushers are probably going to go with this round. I'm probably going to do a lot of my targeting with maybe even within my tier 2 or tier 3. So that's kind of how and then I kind of take my targets. I'm like, okay, here's my targets that I want in tier 2, tier 3, and then those past tiers. It's like, okay, a lot of these guys are going to be available in those mid to late rounds. So that's kind of how I approach things. I kind of try to get it mentally. I'm like, okay, Mike, you're probably not going to get Myles Garrett. You're probably not going to get Miles Crosby. You're probably not going to get Roquan Smith. But you're probably going to get maybe TJ Edwards, or you're probably going to get Fred Warner. You're probably going to get this guy or this guy. So I try to like mentally prepare myself for that, for those IDPs that are going to go off the board.
Nice. And there's always seems like there's like young players, especially that are, jumping up in the ranks. So, like Edgar and Cooper that, of course, had an okay year last year, but, a lot more is expected of them. Diane Henley, one of my favorites, Ivan Pace, because he just is a disruptor. And so there's always, the chance that you're going to get lucky and hit one of those too. So what stats do you think are the best or most, predictive of success in IDP?
So I mentioned it before, snaps. Got to start with the snaps. If you're not on the field, you're not going to record tackles. You're not going to record any type of fantasy points. So always look at the snaps. Who are the guys that are going to be on the field? So for linebackers, it used to be you needed those guys that were always going to be on the field 100% of the time. And while that is still true, the league has shifted such where they're not in their base defense all the time. They're only really running out 2 off-ball linebackers at the same time. Sometimes some defenses are only running out maybe 1 linebacker. So you might have to play the guys that are maybe playing 80%, 85% of the snaps. But those are the guys that are more your like LB3. Those are more your LB2s, you're more your LB3s. But you do have 32 guys that are going to have close to 100% of the snaps. So you do have those top 32 guys. But yes, as far as the first thing I'm looking at is snaps. For edge rushers, if they're playing at least 85% of the snaps, that's a pretty good rate. But I think the average rate for an edge rusher defensive lineman is kind of settling in between 70 to 80%. Cornerbacks and safeties are typically not leaving the field for the most part. You do have your nickel corners that are actually becoming a lot more valuable just because they are playing closer to the line of scrimmage. So they're getting a few more tackle opportunities. They're also playing the run, and they're also being involved in in the pass rush. So they're being asked to blitz. So, like I said, snaps are the first thing you always have to look at. But as far as linebackers and defensive backs, I am looking at the tackle rates. Typically for your elite linebackers, 14% and higher is like what I'm looking at for my LB1. For my LB2s, they should be falling in between that 12.5 to 13.5% range. Your LB3s and 4s are probably between 11 to 11.5%. I'm trying not to get anybody that's in that 10, but sometimes it just happens that way. But typically, if you're getting linebackers that are around 12.5% or higher, that's a pretty good tackle rate. And then big play rates, which you're looking at all the big play rates encompass. So, which is, your sacks, interceptions, forced fumbles, passes defensed, tackles for loss, quarterback hits, and then you're kind of dividing that by their total snaps. So typically an off-ball linebacker should probably have a big play rate of anywhere probably between 2 to 3%. So those big plays kind of give you that upside. As far as edge rushers, I know everybody likes sacks, but sometimes sacks are, I kind of look at them as like running backs and touchdowns. They don't necessarily tell you how. It's a volatile stat. It's not sticky. And sack doesn't tell you how good an edge rusher necessarily is, more than a touchdown tells you how good a running back is. So for defensive linemen and especially edge rushers, I'm looking at pressure rates. I'm looking at win rates. I'm looking at tackles for loss. I think those are the real indicators of future production. I think they're a little bit more sticky than sacks, because I think 2023, Kayvon Thibodeau had, I think, 11 sacks, but had a horrible pressure rate and a horrible win rate. Yeah. And it kind of came back down to earth last year. So he was one guy that I could kind of tell that he just had a whole lot of good luck. And, for me, I'm looking at the edge rushers. If he has a pressure rate less than 12%, that's kind of where probably my cutoff is. If they're in the 10s, that's a streamer in my opinion. Maybe he has a good matchup against a really poor offensive lineman that week, but really, I don't really want the edge rushers that are giving me that 10%.
And I think the Giants agree with you, since they just drafted a defensive or an edge rusher to kind of take his place, because Brian Burns is on the other side. So, I think Kayvon Thibodeau was a highly touted, less execution type defense.
But yeah, I think with pressure rate and win rate, I think is for me is becoming a really strong indicator of future production. So I think there's less boom or bust. Those boom or bust guys are fine in best ball leagues, because you're just getting the best player. But I think for seasonal leagues, you definitely want to get those guys that are going to provide that consistent pass rush that is generating consistent pressure, because that's going to lead to the sacks.
So there's a couple, and again, roles on defense are all important too. And two that we see a lot are in linebackers when they're referred to as green dots.
Yes.
And on safeties, box safeties get brought up a lot, and I guess where they're positioned closer to the front. So why don't you tell us why those are both important when identifying and targeting defensive players?
Sure. When it comes to the role of the linebacker, I think way back when we used to look at it, used to be all about the scheme. All right, I need a 4-3 middle linebacker. I need a 3-4 weak side linebacker. I need a 3-4 inside linebacker. Those were the guys. I don't want a 4-3 strong side linebacker. But with so many defenses now, they're basically in their base defense maybe 15% of the game now. They're mostly in nickel. They're in dime, so they're mostly in these 2 linebacker packages. So most of the time, you really want to almost look at their coverage schemes, because linebackers they're not dropping in coverage, but they're mostly playing in that short space. They're mostly linebackers. I think it was last year they were the cover 2 linebackers had, I think, the highest tackle rate. They're dropping more post snap. cover two is almost forcing the quarterback to throw more short routes, underneath routes. So they're getting more of those tackle opportunities. So, but again, it kind of, again, falls into snaps. If they're playing 100% of the snaps, it's a good thing. If they're playing 85 to 90% of the snaps, again, good thing. And again, yes, the green dot linebackers, those are the linebackers that are basically, that signifies they've got the communication helmet. So they are literally the quarterbacks of the defense. So they are the ones that are relaying the signals. They're relaying the plays from the defensive coordinator, relaying it to the defense. So they're getting everybody in position, relaying the snap, pre-snap, and they're getting everybody in position. So green dot, not necessarily does it signify production, but it's important because they're going to play 100% of the snaps. And what we say, if you're on the field, you have a chance to produce. So it isn't really a coincidence that the linebackers at the top of the scoring are the ones that are wearing the green dot. I mean, it's not really a coincidence. And then safeties, yeah, you want the safeties that are playing up near the line of scrimmage. There are a lot of safeties these days are now playing more in the slot. They are playing more in the box, but there's not really, I guess, that true like box safety that there used to be. You had that, God, I can't even remember some of the names. You had your Adrian Wilsons, you had your box safeties that would always play right up near the line of scrimmage. But, you want your safety to be playing up near the line of scrimmage around 70 to 80% of the time between playing in the box or playing on the slot. However, there's always those outliers where you have your deep safeties that are getting a lot of plays or making a lot of tackles. So it's not necessarily being a hard and fast statement anymore that you want only the box guys. But like I said, the nickel corners are starting to make inroads in production because they're obviously, they're playing in the slot. They're playing the speedy receivers. And like I said, they're playing the run a little bit more in run support, and they're also being called on to blitz a little bit more. But like I said, I always like the safeties that are playing more toward the line of scrimmage. Just they're closer, more or less. They have more chances to make plays, more or less to make tackles.
All right. Well, now that we covered the general approach, why don't we talk about some individual players? The defensive line. Give me some of your favorite defensive tackles and defensive end edge rushers that you like this year.
So, go ahead, Rick.
I was going to say, would it make sense to actually pop up some of the top lists that you provided to us? And
you want to do that, Rick?
Yeah, we can do that, and that way you have something you can kind of.
I've been taking notes in case you're wondering why I'm not always talking. I'm learning. So
Mike was really generous and shared his top 10 list for the three main position groups. So why don't we go ahead and just pop up the first one, which is defensive line.
So yeah, those are kind of my top 10 defensive linemen. The one guy that might stand out to you guys and maybe some others, I love Jared Verse this year. I actually wrote about him on my Substack. Kind of outlined why I think he's in line for a huge 2025 season. He had a remarkable rookie year, generated a lot of pressure, but was really unlucky. But I do think this year, if he can convert some of those quarterback hits, convert some of that luck into some sacks, I think he can be in line for a big year. I do like Gregory Rousseau of Buffalo again. One of the things I am getting a little worried with the Trey Hendrickson situation with the contract. So that is definitely a situation to kind of keep an eye on. Cincinnati's a little bit cheap. It was one of those situations, kind of like it seems very eerily similar to I don't know if you guys have seen Straight Outta Compton, but it seems very eerily similar to the scene when Ice Cube said, "Hey, you told me if Air America's Most Wanted hit, you'd give me my money. Well, now you're telling me you're not going to give me my money. So if I'm Trey Hendrickson, I'm probably busting into the president's office and probably busting some office furniture and, probably busting some heads open." But we'll see how things shake out with Hendrickson. But some of the other guys that are not on my top 10, I do like Chop Robinson of the Dolphins. Again, another really good rookie year. He actually had more sacks in his first pro year than he ever produced in Penn State. One of the things that was kind of a concern is he didn't have much production in Penn State. How would that translate? Well, I think he did just fine as a rookie. I think he had a pressure rate over 20%, pretty solid win rate, 6 sacks as a rookie. So I definitely like Chop to have a big second year. I know maybe with Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb potentially returning, but I just don't see how you can keep Chop off the field. And I like the Los Angeles edge rusher, and I'm going to totally butcher his name, Tuli Tuipolatu, and I totally butchered that. With Joey Bosa off in Buffalo, I think Mac and Tuli are going to be a pretty good combo, and I think he can sniff out double digits this year.
And are there any others that you'd kind of fade from the defensive line? I know that Micah Parsons had a bad, for a Micah Parsons level, it was a bad year for him last year. Are you seeing him rebounding or?
Oh no, the one guy I'm probably fading, and I wrote about him on the IDP show, on my fades for the year. I probably won't have any Andrew Van Ginkel this year. I think he got aided by a lot of big plays. I think he had 2 pick sixes. So I think he got a points boost from some of the pick sixes. He had a career year in big play rate, and obviously a career year in sacks. So I think the Vikings bring on Dallas Turner a little bit more. So I think you're going to see a little bit more Dallas Turner. I think you might see a little bit, not as much, maybe Andrew Van Ginkel. So Van Ginkel is probably someone I'm probably not going to have a whole lot of this year.
We'll switch now over to linebacker. And, there's a couple of names. I mentioned Edward and Cooper. You also have Diane Henley. And he was competing with another linebacker, as I recall, last year. It seemed to.
Yeah, they had brought in Junior Colson and Denzel Perriman. So those two didn't factor into very much. And Henley had a huge year. So I think he's probably in line for another solid year. I know people are probably still getting the stink off of his week 17 goose egg out of their, off of them. But I think he's still one of the top linebackers. And yeah, Edgerrin Cooper, I think, is in line for a huge year in Green Bay in his second year. And I really like Jack Campbell to kind of go off for the Lions this year.
Nice. Thoughts on Zach Braun, since he burst out last year?
Yeah, Bond's fine. He's probably gonna. I think he's probably gonna be going earlier than probably where I feel comfortable taking him. So I think he's probably gonna still be one of the top linebackers off the board. But I'll have if someone wants to take Bond first and allow some of these other guys to kind of drop. I know Bobby Wagner. He's probably going to play till his legs fall off. I don't know. I just think he's
been great for a long time.
Yeah. So I think he's just playing till his legs fall off. But there's a lot of linebackers 11 through 20 that can make a case for the top 10. So anybody who's playing 100% of the snaps certainly has a shot to kind of be a top 10 guy. And I do like Cleveland's Carson Schwessinger. I think he has a chance to be a 3-down guy right out of the bat. With Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah already out for the year, his career is kind of up in the air. So I think Schwessinger could see a full-time role immediately as a rookie. I mean, they drafted him 33rd, which was a total surprise to me. I really liked him anyway. So I really liked the pick. He was one of my favorite linebackers that I evaluated over the course of the offseason and during the draft process. So I was really happy. I was just very surprised that they spent the draft capital on an off-ball linebacker.
So would you say linebacker is the deepest of the 3 positions?
Yes, it's deep, but it's not deep, if that makes any sense. Once those top 20, top 25 come off the board, then you're kind of swimming in some uncharted waters. You have some guys that you can rely on maybe as your LB2s, LB3s, but they're shaky as an LB1, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
So once those guys, those full-time guys start coming off the board, that's kind of where your
the threshold.
Yeah. I guess they call it the RB dead zone. You're kind of entering almost the same thing for the almost the same thing. Like I said, it's a deep position, but at the same time, it's not deep.
So
it's a replaceable position, but it's a replaceable position. So if because when a run back gets hurt, basically the next guy comes up. Pretty much the same thing for the linebacker. If somebody gets hurt, you got a next man up kind of a mentality. The next guy up.
Now, relative to defensive ends and safeties, like is that now those are the ones you start 2, right? Linebacker is the one you have 3. So is that considered deep? Like or is it like for example, like the tight ends, there's like 4 of them, and then it's a crapshoot. So like, is it similar to this, or are the positions similar to this, or is it?
I don't consider that. That's a good comparison, but I consider defensive ends more of the wide receiver. There's a lot. There's only one Justin Jefferson. There's only one Jamar Chase, but there's a lot of really good receivers that are below, that are kind of below that tier. So they're more the wide receivers. So, Myles Garrett is kind of your Jamar Chase, TJ Watt, Max Crosby. Those are your Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb. So you kind of have those first 3 or 4 in that tier, but you got a lot of really good edge rushers that are below that. It's a volatile position. So you're, even with a Myles Garrett, you could have a couple of weeks where he could get you 2 or 3 tackles and probably not a sack, but the next week, 6 tackles, 3 sacks, a forced fumble, and a touchdown return. Then the next week, a sack and a half, 4 tackles. So he's a little bit more consistent, but again, you could have those weeks where he might not get you a sack, but he'll throw in 3 or 4 tackles, but he's still your kind of that weekly starter. There's absolutely no way, Jamar Chase, if he goes for 3 catches for 45 yards, you're like, all right, well, that's it. I'm not playing him next week. I'm going to go someone else. It's just kind of one of those unfortunate weeks. But no, I kind of that edge rusher is more of the wide receiver position.
Okay, the only reason like I said, second grade questions. I just want to have a good understanding for the landscape of the entire player pool, I guess.
And there are going to be some leagues where you're required to draft and roster and start defensive tackles. And again, the scoring from a defensive tackle is a lot different than a defensive end or edge rusher. There are a few defensive tackles that you would suggest, for those leagues where you have to draft a defensive tackle?
I think, Dexter Lawrence, I think, could go under the radar because of returning from an injury. I still like Dexter Lawrence. I like Jeffrey Simmons is always a good guy to target. Chris Jones from Kansas City, also a good target. Just trying to think off the top of my head with some of the defensive tackles. I think one guy that kind of goes overrated is Jalen Carter. He's a really good football player, but sometimes I think he's kind of getting overrated within IDP circles. He's a really good player, plugs the gap, a really good gap stuffer, but I think he's one of those guys. I think he's got a name, but not necessarily good for IDP. But I like Jeffrey Simmons, Chris Jones, and Dexter Lawrence.
And would you target a defensive tackle that's more of a heavy rush, get sacks type of defensive tackle, or are you just as happy getting someone who's stopping runs and
I'll go with the more the tackle heavy guy. The interior linemen necessarily aren't going after the quarterback, so I mean, obviously you got upside if you get some extra upside if you do end up getting one, but your DeForest Buckner's is going to get you 60 or 70 tackles is going to be just fine.
Great. And any linebackers you're off? You mentioned, I guess, Van Ginkel. Oh no, I guess that was a defensive.
No, linebackers. I don't necessarily. For example, Zach Bond. I won't I'm not going to completely ignore, but he's probably someone I'm probably not going to have a whole lot of just because he's going to probably go way too early than where I want to take him. I don't necessarily like to, linebackers are, they're pretty good commodities. So I'm not necessarily going to, necessarily fade somebody. So,
Makes sense.
but off the top of my head now, there's not anybody. Like, for example, I think Devin White went to Devin White was signed. Okay, I'm not going to draft him anywhere. No, I mean him. Yeah. But no, for the most part, every linebacker is in play for me. Where do I want to take him?
And Patrick Queen went through kind of kind of had a lull in his a couple of years, and then all of a sudden now he's back to being someone folks are targeting, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's a 3-down guy, so he'll have value. All depends on where you want to take him. I'm probably not, like I said, if he's there like as a 4th or 5th linebacker, I'll take him. That's fine.
Nice. Got it. Okay, and defensive backs, and again, these are mostly safeties, but there's one quarterback, and kind of talk us through some of your favorites.
So I really like Jalen Petre this year. He's moved to the slot. So I really think he's going to have a really good shot to make a contribution with tackles. He was a top safety a few years ago as a rookie, kind of had a down year, moved back to the slot, I think last year. So saw kind of a rise in production. So I think Jalen Petre, has a pretty good year. Tyler Nubin was a top safety before he got hurt. So if he brings in a full season entering his second year, I think I had him projected at about 125 tackles in his second year with the Giants. And there's not a whole lot around him to make tackles. I know they got Bobby Okereke, Micah McFadden is fine, but yeah, Nubin was on pace for a huge year before he got hurt. And then Kyle Duggar is always going to be a guy that I target, and Grant Delpit are two safeties that I'll always try to target in my leagues from the Patriots, and Delpit from the Browns. Taylor is an interesting one. He got a big boost with defended passes last year. Pretty good tackler. So if you're kind of in some of those big play leagues that are kind of also rewarding a little bit more for the defended passes, I think Alontae Taylor is a pretty good cornerback prospect. I also like Kyler Gordon from Chicago to have a good year with Chicago. I also like Mike Sandstro with the Commanders, also playing kind of that outside and also some of the slot too in Washington. So a few corner targets, but basically the defensive back is a position that you don't necessarily have to target early. I typically will not have any of these guys. Usually Duggar and Delpit I'll usually be lucky to get, but like guys like Brian Branch, Winfield, James, Hamilton, Baker are probably going to go earlier than where I want to take the defensive back position, especially safety. They don't have a high repeatability in terms of their performance from a year-to-year basis. So I think the defensive back position is probably the most volatile and has the most variance on a year-to-year basis. So
sounds like the one you wait on and pick the guy you like. Like that's why you're
for the most part. Yep, yeah. Exactly. Yep, for the most part. Because there's always a guy that's going to appear out of nowhere, like Nick Cross did last year. I mean, nobody had hit. I mean, I did not foresee him coming out of the gate with 140 tackles or whatever it is that he posted last year. So you talk about somebody that I'm fading this year, it's definitely Nick Cross. One, it's a new defensive coordinator and it's going to be a new scheme. And they also brought in Cameron Bynum, who's probably could eat up into some of that tackle share. So Nick Cross is another guy that I'm probably going to be fading.
And especially with the cornerback, and is this a true statement that the absolute shutdown cornerback, and I'm thinking of Denver in particular, do you not actually go after that cornerback because you're not going to get the number of passes or past defenses and maybe the cornerback on the other side of him is the person you're actually targeting?
Yeah, so I think last year it was Riley Moss who actually had a pretty good year opposite Patrick Surtain. So yes, the shadow corners are the ones that follow. I mean, they're probably not going to be targeted as much, but they also could see targets, because if Patrick Surtain is covering, say, Jamar Chase is still going to get targeted heavily. I mean, because
he is shadowing
Jamar Chase. So,
you're right.
But it's more times than not, they may not see the ball enough to be IDP, to be IDP worthy. But
I think Denver even drafted another cornerback this year too.
Yeah, they drafted Jahdae Barron, who I actually really like.
I like him a lot too. So I drafted him in all the IDPs that I was able to.
All right. Any rookies you're targeting?
Schlesinger for the Browns. He's probably going to be my third or fourth. But what I'm also trying not to do is, over the last couple of years, rookies aren't really seeing the field as much as they have been in years past. So, even like Edgerrin Cooper, he didn't see the field until maybe more along the lines mid-season. But I just think the situation with Cleveland and JOK and Schlesinger just has kind of aligned for him to see almost close to a full-time role right out of the gate. I like Donovan Eziruaku from Dallas. I really liked him coming out. Really liked watching him. I think he's going to be involved in the pass rush rotation alongside Micah Parsons. DeMarcus Lawrence went to Seattle, so I think there's going to be some snaps for Eziruaku from Dallas. You're going to have your guys like Abdul Carter. He'll draft capital will probably get him on the field. I think the one guy that we really need to keep an eye on is in Seattle with Nick Imanwori. I really liked him, but I don't think they're just going to hand him a starting job over Kobe Bryant. So that could be a pretty interesting positional battle to watch. And then another rookie I like to watch in San Francisco is Nick Martin. Kind of undersized, but a really good linebacker. Rick, he kind of reminded me a little bit of Ivan Pace. A little bit undersized, but is a speedy linebacker and just can play football, gets to the ball, makes tackles. He is a missile. With Dre Greenlaw in Denver, I think Nick Martin has a chance to play a pretty significant role with San Francisco out of the gate.
Nice. And you're right. A Pace like just a destructive force. And hopefully plays a little bit more in control, because I guess you're always worried about injury with Ivan Pace. So, well, this and again, this has been such a great opportunity to learn more about IDP. I know there's a growing IDP market, but again. A lot of people are afraid to join IDP leagues for whatever reason.
Not afraid, Rick. Not afraid. We play way too many redraft leagues, and it's hard to mix it in and want to learn for that reason. We don't want it to take away what we're doing and with the rest of the million teams. But you guys convinced me to give it a try, so I'm putting in my effort here. This show was great. I learned a lot. I took down tons of notes. Learned about players that I never even heard of. I don't want to say never heard of before, but never really focused on before. So I appreciate this for sure.
Yep, absolutely. And it's a good community. There's a good group of people on Twitter that are willing to help out, answer questions. So my DMs are always open. I do all of my content over at the IDP show. Most of my content is free. We do have a draft kit that is out where I have all my projections. That is very reasonably priced. I will have a green dot article that is going to continue to be free at the IDP show, where I outline all of the full-time and 3-down linebackers. We'll be providing some rankings and projections at the IDP show. And then I also have my own Substack where it kind of allows me to do my own thing, where if I want to write on a topic or if something's interesting, I could just throw something out. So, but it's a really good community, IDP. We're willing to help. So, my Twitter handle is there. Feel free to follow me. Always willing to answer any questions.
I did tease one thing that I thought was a complete greenfield. And so I'm doing a couple of Devi leagues this year. And there are, a lot of great content on the offense side of Devi, but on the defense side, no, not so much. So, give it a thought. Maybe you will
Oh,
taking over an entire market.
I think IDP Nation does a lot with Devi, and Hollywood Titan does a lot with Devi. I've tried. I'm like, I can't follow people in high school or early college. I don't have that kind of time. I'm not doing that. The people that are doing that are pretty crazy. I barely can do Dynasty. I barely like doing Dynasty. So, I mean, I start my evaluations right after the playoffs and the Super Bowl. I start doing all my evaluations. I can't keep up with it all year round. I'll go crazy.
All right, so I guess you told the audience where to find you already. So
yeah, I felt like I got a little bit of that.
Yeah, no, I should have mentioned it, but you picked it up well, so that's good. Join us next Thursday at a regular time. Our guest's going to be Sam Schneider, aka Samwise from Roto Underworld. Before we close out, I want to bring up a good friend of mine who we lost today, a big part of the fantasy industry, Anthony Servino. I started listening to Anthony probably about a year and a half ago, and we started communicating and talking football, strategy, everything, and with, and more extensively in the last few months. He gave me a lot of advice when we started this show, Rick. Told me to, focus on my confidence, be confident when I'm trying to explain my message. He just gave me a lot of good advice, and he really, really supported me. It was a good friend, and I've been emotional all afternoon ever since I saw that post, and, I'm going to miss him. And rest in peace. Prayers go out to his family. There is a GoFundMe. He has a wonderful wife, 10-year-old son, beautiful family. He was a great guy. So if you have anything you can donate, nothing's too small. I'm sure that the family would greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, and one other quick announcement too, and a friend of the TSA family is a gentleman named Larry Schechter. He's recently published a book called The History of Fantasy Sports and the stories of the people that that happened. You can find it on Amazon. I'm sure there's going to be some recognizable names through the history of fantasy football, some folks that are currently involved. And so I'm hoping that you do get a chance to check out the book. And again, I wish I had a link for you, but you should be able to find it. Again, the history of fantasy sports and the stories of the people that made it happen. So Joe, you want to go ahead and close this out?
Absolutely. Mike, appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely.
Thank everybody in the audience, in the chat. Hit the like, hit the subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.
Great. Thanks, everyone.